Naturalist Samantha Russell Blumenkernig, and you have made it to a window into the world of northern Sawwit owls at the Eagle River Nature Center. So you're meeting with us and doing our lecture online. Before we get started, I want to take a minute to recognize, honor, and celebrate that the Eagle River Nature Center exists on Dena'ina land. Our amazing place that we all love wouldn't be possible without generations upon generations upon generations of past stewardship. Before we get going today, too, I want to just mention that unfortunately, because of the ongoing pandemic, we were unable to have our annual fall auction, which is where we get most of our donations and fundraising throughout the year. So in lieu of that, we're having a Nurture the Nature Center fundraiser. And in just a moment, I'm going to drop the link in the chat. And even though our main building remains closed to the public, we're still working behind the scenes to make sure the trails are in great shape, to organize amazing programs like this, and continue being available to our community, even though we don't get to see you in person. With that, we're super fortunate to have Andrew Fisher with us today. He has been doing all sorts of amazing research here at the Eagle River Nature Center. And with questions, as we have questions today, we're a little bit of a larger group. It looks like we're sitting at about 24 participants. And so I'm going to ask that we either hold our questions to the end, or if you're really worried about forgetting it or something like that, if you could drop it in the chat box, and I'll chime in when there's a natural break as Andrew's talking. And that's just going to keep us from talking over each other and completely overwhelming Andrew. So with that, I'm going to take it away, Andrew.
Thanks, Samantha. I'm Andrew Fisher. I'm an avid birder. I moved up here 2015 with my wife, who's from Fairbanks. And a little just short 30 seconds about me. I grew up overseas in East Africa, in Kenya, and I never ever thought I'd ever move to Alaska, let alone ever see a Sawwit owl or anything like that. And when I moved up here in 2015, I realized I needed something to do in the middle of winter when it was cold, dark, and I needed something bird related to get me out and about. And so a friend of mine started building owl boxes 5 years ago. And we started off with 6 boxes the first year. And then we've slowly kind of added to that. And then my wife and I moved out to the Nature Center, moved out to Eagle River 2 years ago. And I just walked into the Nature Center one day and said, I'd like to put up some owl boxes. Is that possible? And I met Samantha and Asta and Colin, and they said, sure, you're more than welcome to. We also have some Boy Scout boxes, and I'll get into that in a minute. But that's kind of how I got started. I just walked in, and this was 2 years ago. And now, yeah, we're 2 years into the project, and this is kind of the first sort of public report of what has been taking on out there. And I just want to give a quick thanks to the Eagle River Nature Center for letting me do this project. And I'd like to thank Colin for letting me use some of his photos. And with that, let's start. Let's see if it'll.
You're sharing.
Sorry, guys. I want to go to the next screen.
Go down. Page down.
Hang on one second. New share.
You can try again. Try new share. Click on that again.
Hang on one second, guys.
And try again.
So weird.
Click on the screen and then click.
All right, there we go. Sorry. Okay, so first question I have was, what's the point of the project? Apart from me wanting to spend some time out in nature and get to see some of these cute little owls, I thought it would be fun to kind of document what small owls are actually in the upper Eagle River Valley. If they're mainly Sawwit owls, if they're Boreal owls, if there's some mixture or combination of the two. We know there's a lot of great horned owls out here, and the very rare and occasional great gray owl, and occasionally short-eared owls. But I wanted to find out, what are the main species that are using the area? What are their preferred habitat types? The Nature Center has, a whole host of different micro vegetation communities, And, you know, it's got large stands of cottonwood trees. It's got really dense black spruce. It's got some more open white spruce, some birch and cottonwood mixed, and it's got, you know, a couple different ponds and rivers. And I wanted to understand what are sort of the main areas that are being used. I also want to take a look at what are the population dynamics doing. Are they having increased reproduction? What's the survival? What are they eating out there? Another really interesting goal is a friend of mine bands Sawwit owls and Boreal owls down in Homer every winter, and he's been doing that for a decade now. And we know very little about Sawwit migration. And every winter he gets a lot of birds moving through his property, but we wanted to know if they are local birds or if they are birds migrating from a further distance. And one way to do that is to start banding owls in other locations and see if they show up at any of his nets. And so I kind of wanted to start, understanding if these birds leave the Eagle River nature area in the wintertime, if they stay all winter, what they do. We also wanted to look at how long they live and if they have nest predation, if they have competition from other owls or from squirrels, and then to provide some educational opportunities. And so this talk is one of those educational opportunities. So the first thing that I had to do was to figure out what we were dealing with. And the Nature Center provided me a hand-drawn map of these 15 to 18 locations where Boy Scouts, I think in the early 2000s, had done an Eagle Scout project and had built all these boxes. They had put them up and they had never monitored them from what I know. They may have once or twice, but they had kind of gone by the wayside. So Samantha and Asta gave me this map and sort of said, good luck. And I walked around out there with my wife. She's the one in black. And then our friends, Roz and Jim Singleton. He's strapping the boxes to a ladder to 2 sleds. And we just started hiking around, looking at this map and trying to figure out where the owl boxes were. There was no GPS coordinates. And so we kind of looked at the bend in the trails and hiked around, and we eventually found about 15 of the boxes. Some of them were never located. Some of them we think probably rotted and fell down. But that was the winter of 2018, early 2019. We started taking all these old boxes down, and then the picture on the right is my garage. We started repairing them and then putting them back together, and then we started hiking back out there. The picture on the left is Roz and Jim, and they'd climbed this 30-foot ladder to this box that was way up in this tiny little birch tree. And just when he was about to take the box down, a flying squirrel came rocketing out of this box and landed on the cottonwood tree in the foreground. And if you look at the very top right of the photo, you can see this sort of brown streak on the tree, and that's the flying squirrel that came out of this box. So one of the things we learned is what was using the boxes in the 15 plus years that they had been up. And in this case, it was a flying squirrel. But we took all the boxes down. Most of them were too high up for us to effectively reach and feel safe. And some of these boxes were on tiny little birch that felt, you got up there and it was just really flimsy. So I have located all of them a little bit lower down. It doesn't seem to make any difference in whether or not owls use the boxes. And then I'd hike out there with my dog, sometimes my wife, and we'd put up the boxes. And here are a couple of photos of different people that have come out to help put up the boxes. You can see, at least in these 2 photographs, I've chosen large spruce trees to put the owl boxes on. Before I really got into this project, I did some research on the nesting behaviors of Sawwit owls. I talked to Alaska Department of Fish and Game up in Fairbanks that runs a Boreal owl box. I talked to 2 of their biologists to find out what they would recommend in terms of box placement, location, direction, height, and all that kind of stuff. And I kind of put it all together. And through this project, we're learning more and more about what particular habitat types the owls tend to like. But basically, I got up all of the boxes by early December, because kind of by mid to late December, the male Sawwit owls will start calling and trying to attract a female. And so you need the boxes up by pretty much by New Year's in order to get give enough time for males to find your boxes and then hopefully attract a female. So after we put up the boxes in December, basically you wait for spring to arrive. Sometime between mid-April and early May, I would go out and visit every single box. And in this case, this is the same box. This is one of the old Boy Scout boxes that I sort of revamped and repaired. And sometimes when you walk up to the box, if you, just by simply crushing the leaves around there, if there's an owl in the box, sometimes they'll stick their head out and sometimes they won't. But what I have done is I have an endoscope on a painter's pole that I stick up in the box, and that allows me to see what is in the box. And I'll get to some photos of what you can see through the endoscope in a minute. But in this case, the owl on the right didn't want to move, and I just put the little endoscope underneath her tummy and was able to see the little eggs that she was incubating. She eventually got uncomfortable with this little metal rod between her legs and flew to a nearby tree. And so this is sometimes what the females will do. They'll just sit on a nearby branch and sort of glare at you. The photo on the right is the owl that was in this box here. And you can see it has its entire sort of sternum and lower belly is red. And that's because the female Sawwit owls will pluck their chest feathers and lay directly on the eggs to provide direct skin to egg contact for warmth during the incubation period. And so the owl on the left is not an incubating bird, and the owl on the right is an incubating female. You can see they look pretty scraggly when they're going in and out of the box trying to incubate. This is what the image of the endoscope looks like. So when I stick it inside the box, I can see, in this case, it's a female Sawwit owl, and it looks like she has at least 2 young that you can see and some prey remains. The nice thing about using an endoscope is it's completely quiet. A lot of times the birds don't even know that a human is there. It takes about a minute or less to take whatever photos or video you need to look into the box, and then you just pull it out of the hole and you can walk away. And because it's on an adjustable pole, it doesn't really matter how tall or how short the box is, you can usually feed it through. The other thing that I like about it is I don't have to carry a ladder out there to check my boxes. And so, I'm less likely to attract ravens or coyotes or bears or anything like that following human scent. So after you have found that the boxes are active, you kind of begin monitoring. And in my case, I was trying to figure out when the eggs were going to hatch and when the young would be old enough to band. So here's some photos of some really young baby Sawwit owls. In this case, there were 7 eggs in this nest, and 2 of them have hatched so far. They're probably just a few days old. In this photo, you can't see any prey remains, but oftentimes there's voles or shrews or other small mammals that have been stashed around the box on the inside. The male will continue to bring food into the female, and then she'll rip it up and feed the young. As they get older, they start to molt out of their little down pin feathers, and they kind of get this brownish color. The chicks on the left are probably 2 to 3 weeks old, and the chicks on the right are probably 4 to 5 weeks old. You can also see in the photo on the right, there's 2 eggs that never hatched. And in that case, they'll just get tossed out. I don't know why, I've never had a box where 100% of the eggs have hatched. So one of the things we did this year was we put up some remote cameras to monitor some of the active nests. In May, once I learned which nests were active, the Nature Center purchased 2 cameras, and I put them up. Here you can see me installing one of the cameras on a small cottonwood, and then on the right, I'm going through some of the photos. Most of the photos were taken at night, because that's when most of the owls are active, even during the middle of summer. You can see the photo was taken on June 14th at 1 in the morning. Here's a photo of one of the cameras during the day. So although they take day and nighttime photos, most of the photos are during the night. But this photo was interesting because it shows a Sawwit owl outside the box. If you can't see it, it's directly in the middle of the photo. Between the box and the tree, there's an adult Sawwit owl, and a robin is coming in to mob it. And in this case, the bird may just be taking an incubation break. It could be just getting some fresh air, or maybe it was tired of hearing the young constantly cheep at it and it just needed a mental break. So the fun thing about the photos of these remote cameras is you kind of get to see what's going on around the clock at the boxes. I have a lot of photos of squirrels running up and down the tree, looking in the hole, the owl sticking its head out, trying to see what's going on. This is a photo at night. At night, the image quality is much lower, and in this case, I couldn't get the camera very close to the tree. But you can see there is an adult bird bringing food to a young that's sticking its head out of the box. And in this case, you can look at the timestamp, and you can see how frequently food is brought in, and it just gives you a good idea of how frequently the adults are returning to the nest. And then ultimately, if the nest fails, you could go back through the photos and hopefully see, you know, was it a squirrel that went in? Was it a wolverine that crawled up the tree, or a bear? I've had a bear visit one of the boxes and do some damage. So having the nest cameras is really helpful. While we were doing all of this, I would probably visit the nest box about once a month. I tried to keep my visits very infrequent, and the goal was to try to find the best time about a week before the birds were going to leave the box in order to band them. And that happened to be June 16th. And across the board, all of the boxes that were active this year were ready to band on June 16th. And so in this case, I climbed up this I put this box way too high up in this tree. But I crawled up. In this particular box, there were 5 young that were banded, and my friend Tasha there is helping. She's with the Alaska Department of Fish and Game. She's the one that does the banding under her permit and under the National Wildlife Refuge. They have the master banding permit, but here she is helping get the little owls in these little kind of cotton bags down out of the nest while I was pulling them up. And the photo on the left is actually a Boreal owl. This is from a different location. That's what it looks like when they're in their little bags getting taken up or put down out of the box. And the data that we take on them is pretty standard, and it all gets submitted to the bird banding lab. And basically we record the tail length, even though they're growing. We record the wing chord, the weight, and then an estimate of body condition, like how much fat they have, if they have a really sharp keel, which means if their sternum feels really pronounced, it means they're not getting enough food. And then of course the band number. And each bird takes just a couple minutes to process, and then we put them all back up. And this is what it looks like after a chick has been banded and it's waiting to fledge. This is one of my boxes that was attacked by, had a bear rip off part of the roof, and I need to go out and repair it. But this is what the little owls look like kind of late June, right before they leave. They'll sit kind of at the entrance of the box and just watch the world and see what's going on. And then the fun thing about the cameras is they kind of tell you when the young leave the nest. And so in this case, at 2:24 in the morning on June 22nd, one of the young has hopped out of the nest, and the second one, which is in the hole, is contemplating whether or not he's ready to take his first flight. Oh, The bird that's outside of the box is kind of on the right-hand side, midway down the trunk, I don't know, 2 feet out on a branch, and it's flapping its wings. Here's another photo that shows what I think is an adult bird on the far left. You can kind of barely see it in the far left side, and then a little baby sticking its head out of the box. In order to get them to get out of the box, the parents sometimes have to coax them out with food. So they'll carry a shrew or a vole and try to get the little young to hop out of the box. And once they're out of the box, they don't go back. In this case, it was June 23rd. And after this date, I had no more photos of owls on the camera. And so that tells us that they pretty much fledged by June 23rd. They're out of the box, and after that, the box is no longer used till next year. So we've only been doing this for 2 years. The first year, which was 2019, we had 19 boxes, and 3 of them I consider active, even though only one of the boxes actually had a pair and had a successful nest that produced 3 young. One of the boxes, I found a dead owl in it early in the season and had no sign of trauma. It was just a dead owl in one of the boxes, and we don't know what happened there. And then in one of the other boxes, there was a female that laid 4 eggs in late June, early July, and she incubated them all the way until August, at which point I took the eggs and determined that they were all infertile. And so the first year, which was actually pretty exciting to have 3 active boxes, we only produced 3 young. And then last year was a really good year. I only added a couple more boxes, but we ended up having four pairs with 4 nests, and we banded 14 young, which was really, really fun to have that many young get banded out at the Nature Center. So for 2021, there are 24 boxes that have the potential to be used. And I just went through last week and I cleaned out all the boxes, got rid of all the squirrel nests. So not only do owls like to use these boxes, but the tree squirrels absolutely love nesting in them. The photo on the left is a box that was also used later in the season by a Sawwit owl, and it happened to be used first by a squirrel. And so I cleaned out the box after the squirrel nest was done, and then a Sawwit ended up later using it. And then you can see the photo on the right. Sometimes the squirrels really do some damage chewing on the boxes. We will see how well that box holds up this year. This one on the right may need to be replaced. We also had a few boxes that I found hornet nests in. Luckily, none of the boxes that had active owl nests in them had hornet nests, because I don't know how that would end up working out. And fortunately, we haven't had any bear issues or anything else, but all of the boxes are in high bear use areas. So for next year, like I said before, we've got 24 boxes that are ready. We're going to put up some additional cameras to monitor active boxes. We will continue to band the young. I kind of have a pretty good idea, at least from 2 years of data, of where the main area where Sawwits are using my boxes at the Nature Center. So we'll continue to kind of refine that. I plan to put up some merganser or goldeneye boxes in order to increase nesting opportunities for common mergansers and common goldeneyes. And I'd like to say a huge thank you again to the Nature Center for letting me do this, and for Colin for letting me use his photos, and then for everybody else who helped put up the boxes or check the boxes with me or help clean them out. And with that, I'm going to open it up for questions.
Yeah, so feel free to unmute yourself or even unvideo yourself and ask questions, or go ahead and type them in the chat box. Let's see, and Colin, if you're available, is there anything you'd like to add? So there's one question from Julie, and it says, I live near the nature center and we have a lot of great horned owls in the area. Are they conflicting with sawwits?
That's a really good question. And I know that great horned owls will take Sawwit owls. One thing that I did is early in the winter, I kind of mentally made a map of where I heard great horned owls calling. And I specifically did not place any boxes where I knew there was a great horned owl territory. So I didn't want to provide an easy meal for a great horned owl. But I believe that there's actually a pretty strong population of northern Sawwit owls. They're not endangered, they're not threatened, they're not on any rare bird alert list. And so I think they're doing quite well. They have a huge range and they overlap with great horned owls throughout the range. So I don't think it would necessarily deter Sawwit owls from nesting, but I probably wouldn't put one right underneath the great horned owl nest. If you knew there was an active one, I'd move it away.
Excellent. Sharon and Dan ask, do they mate for life?
No, they do not mate for life. Every year, it's up to the male to try to find a new mate or a returning mate. Like most smaller animals, they have a shorter lifespan. And so every year, the male will have to find a new mate. And if it was a really productive area, there's a good chance that the same female would come back. But one of the things we'd like to learn by banding over a few years is to understand if it's the same birds returning, if it's the same female, if it's always, different individuals. But from what we know, they do not mate for life.
Awesome. So we have a couple of questions about boxes. So I'm just going to read a handful of them and let you go. So any tips on if you want to install boxes in your own backyard? What kind of terrain do sawwits prefer? How high up the tree do you place the boxes, and what makes a good tree to locate a nest box?
Those are all really good questions that we're trying to figure out ourselves. I'll start with the first one, how high to place them. Only place them as high as you're comfortable standing on a ladder. So the ones that the Boy Scouts put up, I have a 16-foot ladder, and when I stand on the top of it, I reach about 22 feet. That is taller than I feel comfortable hanging onto a tree, trying to screw in a nest box that weighs 5 to 10 pounds. And so they don't need to be that high up. Technically, 15 feet is about the average that I have read. The Cornell Lab of Ornithology, if you just go onto Cornell's website and just type in Sawwit owl nest box plan, they have a nest box plan. It also works for American kestrels, buffleheads, one other species that uses the same dimensions. It's a 3-inch diameter hole, and the plans are free to download. And that's how I made my boxes. I just downloaded them from Cornell's Lab of Ornithology website. And then they recommend, 15 feet up. There's no particular orientation that they necessarily recommend, but all of my successful boxes have been oriented with a hole away from the prevailing wind in the valley. So they're all oriented east. Yes, looking down the valley. Because I think, if I'm correct, most of the wind comes from the top of the valley down, and all of the boxes are oriented, their holes are oriented the opposite direction. If I get that wrong, I'm sorry. But I didn't pay a whole lot of attention to the actual direction. What I did was I looked at the face of the tree, and I've only put them on birch and large spruce trees. I've been told that the tree diameter needs to be greater than or equal to the diameter of your box. The boxes are about 12 inches in diameter, so you need to have a tree that is at least 12 inches in diameter or larger. And this was something that I found out looking at the Boy Scout boxes that were up for 15 years. Only one of the boxes had a nest in it, had an old nest in it, and that was in a large spruce tree. All the ones that were in small birch trees did not have any nesting for 15 years. So that tells me that birch trees are not necessarily the best bet unless they have large, mature spruce around them. And that's what I have found to be the case. About, let's see, this year, two of the boxes that had nests were on spruce and 2 were on birch trees. But all the ones that were on birch were very large birch trees that had a large cluster of dense green spruce around them. One of the things that I have read is that the redback vole is a dominant food source for Sawwit owls, and they prefer large spruce trees. And so I've had the best success where there are just really big mature spruce trees. And they've all been in flat areas. There's no areas at the nature center. I have 3 boxes out by the Dew Mountain Trail that have had a nest in them, and it's a little bit more hilly there, but all of the ones otherwise are in pretty flat terrain. I think, did that sum it up? And just in case you're curious, you do not need any permit from ADF&G to install or set up nest boxes. You only need a permit if you intend to band them or handle the birds or anything like that. Otherwise, there's no federal or state permit needed to put up an owl box.
So I think you kind of spoke to this a little bit, but some of it is, have you seen a pattern of successful active box locations? What makes a productive area, and what's the survival rate for young owls?
Those are all questions we're trying to figure out the answer to right now. I have not had a box used in consecutive years yet. I've been told that they will use the same box if you just adjust it slightly. So this year I've left a few boxes that were active in the exact same location, and in a few of them I have adjusted slightly. I've put them on a nearby adjacent tree to kind of understand if they will use the same box or not. You know, if it's been used during the summer, then you want to clean it out and put in new shavings. So I've done that for all of the boxes, but the ones that were active in 2019, none of those were used in 2020. And so, and then 2020, 2 of the boxes I readjusted, and then 2 of them I left in the exact same place to try to figure out if that is the case or not. I know there was another part of the question I can't remember. Oh,
Survivorship.
Survivorship, we don't know. We know that they don't survive very long. They only weigh about 110 grams and they're terrible flyers. They fly kind of like a bat, haphazardly. They're not fast. So they rely 100% on camouflage. And so they are very difficult to see. I have never seen one at the nature center hiking around myself. The only owls that I have seen there were ones associated with my boxes. So they're very, very good at camouflage. They'll actually change their body shape to kind of be more elongated if they feel threatened, and you know, to really try to blend in. So that we think they have pretty low survival, simply because if they can get found by an animal, or you know, like a goshawk or great horned owl, they're pretty easy prey because they just can't fly fast or hard or get away. And then my wife reminded me another question about really good nest box locations is anywhere that has a good mixture of spruce and birch that are old and mature. And then I have found if you have a box and it has a nearby really dense pocket of spruce, it's places where the adults can roost during the day. So the adults, when they're not incubating, are not in the box. They are usually somewhere nearby. And so if you have some spruce trees that provide dense protected area where the adults can basically sleep during the day, that seems to be preferred. But that doesn't have to always be the case. They could be higher up in the tree, lower down, but they seem to like semi-open, kind of, but also pseudo-protected. But it's really something I'm trying to figure out myself, is what's a really good location. But what I have found is really big, if you have some really big spruce trees, that seems to be a good indication, because at least you know there's going to be prey around there that they can eat.
Awesome. Do sawwets migrate? Where do they go? And when do they return and leave again?
Those are all questions that we don't know. It's interesting because pretty much the Eagle River and then all the way up into the Palmer area is about the furthest north Sawwet owls breed in the state of Alaska currently. So we know they don't really go north, but we don't know how far south they go. We don't know if they leave the valley, if they are here year round, if there are some that leave, some that stay. So that's why we also want to band as many as we can. Right now, there's only one individual in the state of Alaska that I know that is catching owls and checking them for bands, and that's Jason Sodergren in Homer. And this year he banded his 2,000th owl. He also had a lot of Sawwit owls come through his banding station. And so we know it was a good year for Sawwit owls throughout the state of Alaska, but we don't know anything about where they go, where they disperse to. In the lower 48, there have been a lot more studies about where they migrate to. There's a pretty well-known migration across the Great Lakes, and but we don't know anything about where they migrate here or how long they stay. I have a strong feeling that they just stay year-round because, you know, if they fledge sort of in June, July, and then they start calling in December, that doesn't really give you a lot of time to go somewhere else. And it doesn't really make sense to go somewhere else in, you know, August, September, October, November, and then come back to Alaska in December. So I have a feeling that they probably stay year round, but they are so cryptic. They're so hard to see. If they're not calling, you could walk right past them and never know that they're there. And so we really don't know anything about their dispersal, migration, any of that kind of stuff. So I've talked to ADF&G to see if there are transmitters or you know, GPS geolocators that we could place on owls to kind of track them, and they're pretty expensive and you have to be really technically savvy to know what to do. By the way, all of what I'm doing is just purely volunteer for the heck of it, and so, you know, I have to find time in my own schedule. I work as a professional biologist, and so some of this stuff is, you know, squeezed in when I have spare time, but hopefully that answered all the questions so far.
You're nailing it, Andrew. And we have even more questions. I love this. So you've talked a little bit about how it's important to kind of clean out the boxes and kind of change them up each year, but is there anything specific that you do to discourage squirrels?
Not that I know of yet. Part of the project is to work with other people who are doing boxes around the state. And my friend Tasha, who works for ADF&G, runs an owl project in in Seward. And she has found that painting like a red pepper mixed in with the paint potentially can discourage squirrels. I think that's mainly from chewing on the box. If you read the nest building guidelines, they don't want you to paint the box with anything. Some of my boxes I have slightly kind of sprayed with just a light brown spray paint so that they're not as white and obvious. And so, but I haven't painted them. But I've never tried the pepper. I have no idea if, sorry, there's some background noise from kids are coming in having a snack, but I haven't tried anything to see what it will do. I have found a squirrel nest on top of an owl nest, which makes me think that if the owls leave, the squirrels will come in and can build a nest. But I have seen an owl actively chase away a squirrel. I went to one of the boxes and there was an adult sitting next to it, and a squirrel was chirping and ran up, and the adult owl dive bombed, attacked the squirrel, and got it away from the box. So I know there's some aggression that they can exhibit to keep squirrels away, but I also know that squirrels will eat the eggs, and they can, you know, basically suffocate the nest by filling it with moss and leaves. And one of mine yesterday was full of pine cones and dried up mushrooms. So it's an ongoing battle. I don't know the answer to it. Large mature spruce trees are also favored by squirrels. So I will look around the base of the trees, and if I see an active, you know, squirrel nest or cache or the little piles of pine cone shavings that they have eaten nearby, I'll try to choose a tree that doesn't have that. I also will look up in the tree, and if it has a squirrel nest in it, sorry, turn that off. I will not place the box in a tree that I can see a squirrel nest is in. So squirrels seem to be the largest just irritation because they are so tenacious, and they've got nothing better to do than to irritate and fill your nice box with all kinds of stuff. If anyone has really good tips for keeping squirrels out of owl boxes, please let me know, because I have a feeling that that is going to be an ongoing battle. I've also tried putting squirrel nest boxes on nearby birch trees, because squirrels don't typically build a nest in a birch tree, to see if I can get the squirrels to leave the box alone if it's in a birch tree. And I don't think I have enough data on that yet.
Nice. How do you, oh, well, here's two questions. How do you distinguish between males and females? And then in the absence of a box, where do they select nesting sites?
So there's no way to tell if it's a male or female just by looking at it. The difference is in basically body mass and wing cord length, with females being slightly larger than males. Females are like 130 to 150 grams, and then males are like 100 to 130 grams. So there's a big zone of overlap. The only way to know that basically is to take their wing length and to weigh them. But during the nesting season, you can tell if it's a female by if she has plucked all her chest feathers out and she's incubating eggs. But otherwise, it's impossible to know what the gender is. And then, can you remind me what the second half of the question was? Sorry.
No worries. So where, without nesting boxes, where do they nest naturally?
So that's a good question. I've never found a natural nest here in Alaska, but what I have read is that they nest in either old woodpecker tree cavities or a broken off, hollowed out section of a tree, probably a birch. You know how birch will oftentimes split, and then they'll get water in them, they'll kind of rot out. Just any sort of natural cavity. I don't know if there's any woodpeckers that are really large enough here to make a hole that could be used by a Sawwit owl. The diameter of the hole they need is about 3 inches. And northern flickers or blackback woodpeckers are about the same size. Maybe even a hairy woodpecker could make about the same size, but I don't know if their holes are quite large enough. So my wife and I did a short rotation in Dillingham, and I found quite a few Boreal owl natural tree cavities, and those were all in birches that had either split or a branch had broken off and there was a natural opening. I have found a few of those here at the Nature Center, and I've checked them with my endoscope, and I've never seen any indication of a nest in them. But I know that they're out there. I think they're just really hard to find.
All right. NC says that they've tried using capsaicin spray to deter squirrels from chewing, and it didn't work. But to pivot just a little bit, I muted myself there, sorry. But could you say more about the merganser and goldeneye boxes? Like, where would they go? How would they be different? Things like that.
Yeah, so I think it would be fun to put up a few large boxes for waterfowl, mainly because I don't know, how many nest locations there are for them at the Nature Center. I know that they have nested there before, but they need a certain amount of open water. They need really, really large trees that have a big cavity with a big hole. And so I'm thinking of just putting a few boxes near one of the creeks, off some of the trails that that kind of overhang water, where there's large spruce trees overhanging water, putting just a few boxes to see if they get used by either, common mergansers or barrows or common goldeneye. So I haven't done that yet, and I'm planning on talking more with my friends at ADF&G to see what they recommend, because they have some waterfowl boxes out in the Portage Valley area. A lot of people have told me, whose boxes are those out in Portage Valley? And most of those are waterfowl boxes for golden eyes and things like that. But it's just another kind of interest of mine to see if we can get other species nesting out there at the Nature Center.
Well, phenomenal. I think that just about wraps up all of the questions in the chat box. Thank you for spending so much of your afternoon with us today, and thank you for being a part of this project. We really, really appreciate it. I know a handful of you just joined recently, and so unfortunately you've missed the bulk of the presentation, but this has been recorded and we'll post a link when it becomes available. I just need to do some editing on this end, so it's not, 15 minutes of Andrew and I staring at each other before I put it online. And then, yeah, and thank you everyone for taking the time. Stay safe out there. We hope everybody gets to spend some great time outside.
Yeah, thanks. And if anybody has other questions about owls or wants some tips on, where to place them, I live here in Eagle River and nothing to do. No. But I love to, I don't know, it's a passion, hobby. So yeah, it seems to be that these little owls readily take to boxes if placed in the right location. And so, and I know plenty of people who have them in their backyards just because they have the correct habitat around there for Sawwit owls. And so, yeah, let me know, or, send Samantha an email and she can forward it on to me if anybody has questions or comments, or if anyone has a good solution for keeping squirrels out of boxes, let me know. Thanks.
You bet. And I just dropped to reach out to me. It's naturalist@ernc.org, and I'll pass you on to Andrew. So, all right. Thank you again, everyone.
Thanks.